Okay, welcome to lecture 2.3. In this mini lecture, we're going to talk about some of the extensions of cognitive psychology and also some of its limitations. So let's start with the extensions. The field of cognitive psychology has been around for a long time, and it's been useful in other fields. So when cognitive psychologists work with computer scientists and work with linguists, the field is a little different, and we call that field cognitive science. Cognitive science. There's also an application of cognitive psychology to understanding the brain, to the field of neuroscience, trying to understand what parts of the brain are responsible for different parts of cognition and exactly what the brain is doing during various cognitive processes. And we call that field cognitive neuroscience. Cognitive psychology has impacts on all sorts of fields. So these are places where in the future, in your employment opportunities, where you could apply what you're learning here to different fields of employment. Business and economics. You cannot sell something until you understand what people value, how they make decisions, how they perceive ads, what ads they'll remember, what aspects of your product they'll remember, how can we make sense of what the stock market is doing. This is all cognitive psychology, and cognitive psychologists who want to make a lot of money go into the fields of business and economics. Education is a big field for applying cognitive psychology. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about learning and memory. Well, what do students need to do? Learn new stuff and remember things. So cognitive psychology definitely applies to education. It also applies to medicine. If you're pre-med, you need to think seriously about this class. In fact, the MCATs, which are the exams that people take as they're applying to medical school, they've just changed the structure to contain a lot more information about psychology and sociology because doctors need to be human beings. And it turns out that the way doctors talk to their patients changes the decisions that those patients make. So for example, if a doctor tells you there's a 10% chance that a particular surgery will kill you, you are less likely to opt for having that procedure than if the doctor said exactly the same thing in a different way. If the doctor had said there's a 90% chance that you'll survive, people are more likely to take the surgery when they hear the 90% survival rate than when they hear the 10% death rate, even though the two ways of presenting the information are statistically speaking identical. The way information is conveyed influences the decisions that we make. Cognitive psychology is very relevant for development and also aging. I'll show you some aging examples here in a minute. It's important to understanding the field of sociology. It's critical in how we design products. Facebook works, the internet, social media companies work because they take advantage of fundamental principles of learning, frankly, behaviorism. Artificial intelligence, right? There is a huge push right now to develop self-driving cars, which is going to have a very big impact on the employment world that you guys are going to have to deal with, because right now I think it's 20% of jobs in the US involve driving, and if all those jobs are lost to computers, self-driving cars, that's going to have a big impact on all of our lives. So I promised you an example of application of cognitive psychology to aging. One of the things we'll talk about this semester is a disorder called dementia, or you may have heard the phrase Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes people pronounce it old-timers disease, but Alzheimer's is the name of the researcher who first described the disorder. It turns out that nursing homes or apartments or housing complexes that house older people are realizing, thanks to cognitive psychology, that if they change the structure of their environment, their residents will be a lot happier. So we're going to learn when we get to dementia, which is it's a neurodegenerative disease. Parts of your brain start to die, and that causes all sorts of problems, but the big one is memory. It turns out that there are many different kinds of memory, and there are memories that we're conscious of, like I remember having breakfast this morning, but there are also memories that we don't have conscious access to, implicit memories. And it turns out that Alzheimer's disease spares implicit memories for the longest amount of time. So if you create environments, and I should go back and say, have you heard the phrase muscle memories? Muscle memories are a type of implicit memory. And it turns out muscle memories last a long time in people with Alzheimer's disease. So as long as somebody's in a familiar environment, even if they have Alzheimer's disease, they're more likely to be able to get around in that environment. So in the Netherlands, they're adding cafes and bars to their nursing homes, to their residences for elderly people. They're offering rooms that simulate going to the beach, enabling their residents to perform activities that they don't have to think consciously too much about, where they've got automatic reactions, and that has a really big positive impact on the lives of people who live in residences for those with dementia and mental memory problems. Okay. Now, cognitive psychology cannot explain everything. There are some limitations that I want you to keep in mind this semester as we talk about cognitive psychology. And one of them is called ecological validity. Most of cognitive psychology, the research of cognitive psychology, is conducted in a laboratory. Most laboratories don't look a whole lot like the real world, right? So when the studies are being conducted in a lab, it's not clear whether the results of those studies are going to generalize, will be applicable outside of the laboratory. In other words, are researchers studying cognition in make-believe worlds, or are they studying cognition as it actually occurs in the real world? This is a big dilemma in the field. And it's a limitation of a lot of the studies we're going to talk about this semester. Another limitation is something called reductionism. Now, this isn't specific to cognitive psychology, and frankly, neither is ecological validity, but they're still important constraints. So reductionism is something that happens a lot in the sciences, where you take some complex phenomenon and you try to understand it by breaking it down into different parts. You'll see often in this class that people like to model cognitive processes like memory by breaking them down into little boxes with arrows. So we can say, okay, in this box is where encoding happens, and in that box is where storage happens. When you break things down, when you separate complex things into little simple things, a lot is lost, right? A lot is lost. The interactions between the things that you've broken apart, all of that is lost. The whole gestalt, how the system works together is lost. And this is a problem, a limitation for a lot of research in cognitive psychology. Okay, last slide in this section. This is a picture on your screen right now of what computers looked like when I was a kid. They were these huge boxes that filled entire rooms. You probably have more, you definitely have more computing power in your cell phone. Oh, new text. You have more computing power in your cell phone than this entire room of computers has. But as psychologists back then tried to think about how cognitive processes work, they were drawn to the computer. And cognitive and computer scientists were drawn to psychologists, right? hence the creation of the field cognitive science. So a lot of times you're going to see something called a computer or an information processing analogy, right? That there's some similarities between the way computers process information and people process information. And I've got some boxes and arrows drawn in this slide. You know, we take information in, we process it, we hold it in memory until we need it, and then we pull it out of memory and use it in the world. That simple-minded model applies both to computers and to people. And so a lot of times you'll see computer analogies used in cognitive science and human analogies used in computer science. Okay, that's all I'm going to tell you for lecture 2.3. Come back for just a minute for mini lecture 2.4, where we will discuss the question of, do computers think? See you in a minute.